Long before anyone knew Jamie Foxx could sing or win Oscars, he was stealing condoms from dogs and delivering babies while impersonating doctors in one of the 1990s most outrageously crude comedies. From a screenwriter who wrote with a calculator to avoid expensive scenes, to a competing movie with an identical plot, to a future Stargate star making her film debut in a hospital scene, Booty Call hides more bizarre secrets than you'd expect from a 79-minute quest for contraceptives. Fact 1. Bill Bellamy claims he invented the title. Before Jamie Foxx was cracking jokes about condoms and dogs, in 1997's Booty Call, comedian Bill Bellamy was already making his mark on comedy with a phrase that would eventually become a movie title. According to Bellamy himself, he actually coined the term booty call that the film borrowed for its name, though this claim has never been officially verified and remains a point of debate among comedy historians. Bill Bellamy was riding high in the mid-1990s as one of the hottest stand-up comedians and television personalities of the era. He had already established himself as a regular on MTV, hosting shows and bringing his smooth, confident style to audiences across the country. During his comedy routines, Bellamy would often talk about modern dating and relationships, and it was during these performances that he claims to have first used the phrase booty call to describe those late-night phone calls people make when they're looking for physical companionship without emotional commitment. The timing certainly seems to line up with Bellamy's claim. He was performing this material in his stand-up acts well before the movie went into production, and the phrase had started making its way into popular culture through his comedy specials and television appearances. However, like many slang terms, it's nearly impossible to pinpoint exactly who first said booty call or when it entered common usage. Language experts and comedy scholars have noted that phrases like this often emerge organically from multiple sources around the same time period. What makes this particularly interesting is that Bellamy has never shied away from taking credit for the phrase, even as the movie became a cult classic and the term entered mainstream vocabulary. Whether he actually invented it or simply helped popularize it, there's no denying that Bill Bellamy played a significant role in bringing booty call into the cultural conversation long before audiences were laughing at Jamie Foxx's adventures in late-night contraception. Shopping. Fact 2. The screenwriter used a calculator while writing. When Takashi Bufford sat down to write the screenplay for Booty Call, he had something most screenwriters don't keep on their desk while crafting dialogue and plotting scenes: a calculator. According to industry reports, Bufford literally wrote the entire script with a calculator positioned right beside him, constantly doing math to make sure every scene he created could actually be filmed without breaking the bank. This unusual writing approach wasn't born out of some quirky creative process, but rather from pure financial necessity and smart planning. Bufford knew from the beginning that he was writing what would become a low-budget comedy, and he understood that even the smallest creative decisions could have major financial consequences down the line. Every time he considered adding a new location, an elaborate stunt, or additional cast members to a scene, he would stop writing and start calculating how much those elements would cost to actually put on screen. The calculator method meant that Bufford was essentially serving as both the creative writer and the budget manager simultaneously, making sure that his artistic vision stayed within realistic financial boundaries. Instead of writing freely and letting someone else worry about the costs later, he was constantly checking himself to ensure that every car chase, every location change, and every special effect he included could be accomplished with the limited resources he knew would be available. This approach proved to be incredibly effective, as the finished film managed to tell a complete story with plenty of laughs, while keeping production costs around $7 million. The movie's success at the box office, earning over $20 million, proved that Bufford's mathematical approach to screenwriting had paid off in more ways than one. His calculator-assisted writing process helped create a film that was both financially responsible and entertaining, showing that sometimes the most creative solutions come from working within strict limitations rather than having unlimited resources. Fact 3. Toronto pretended to be New York badly. Booty Call was supposed to take place in the bustling streets of New York City, but anyone familiar with Manhattan could tell something was off about the locations shown on screen. The production team decided to film significant portions of the movie in Toronto, Canada, attempting to make the Canadian city double for the Big Apple, and according to film critics, the substitution was painfully obvious to anyone who knew what real New York actually looked like. This kind of location switching happens all the time in Hollywood, where filmmakers regularly use cheaper cities to stand in for more expensive ones, but Booty Call became a particularly notable example of how budget constraints can make these substitutions glaringly apparent. While some productions managed to convincingly transform one city into another through careful camera work and strategic location selection, the makers of Booty Call weren't quite as successful in hiding the fact that they weren't actually filming in Manhattan. The hospital scenes were specifically shot in Toronto, Ontario, which made financial sense since Canadian locations often offered better deals for American film productions during the 1990s. However, the rest of the movie was filmed in actual New York locations, including Chinatown in Manhattan, creating a strange mix where some scenes genuinely captured the authentic New York atmosphere, while others looked distinctly un-Manhattan-like to viewers who knew the city well. Industry reviewers at the time didn't hold back in pointing out the unconvincing location work. Variety magazine specifically noted that the film's attempt to substitute Toronto for New York had results decidedly non-Manhattan, essentially calling out the production for failing to make the Canadian city look convincingly like its American counterpart. This criticism highlighted how the movie's tight budget affected not just the story and casting, but even the basic visual authenticity of the settings where the action was supposed to take place. Fact 4. There was a competing identical movie. The year 1997 witnessed one of Hollywood's strangest coincidences when two completely separate film studios released movies with almost identical plots about young men desperately searching for condoms. Booty Call wasn't the only film that year centered around a frantic late-night quest for contraceptives, as another movie called Trojan War featured the exact same basic storyline, creating an awkward situation where audiences could choose between two different versions of essentially the same story. The similarities between the two films were remarkable and went far beyond just the general premise. Both movies followed male protagonists who found themselves in urgent need of protection for a romantic encounter. Both featured wild adventures through their respective cities as the main characters tried to obtain condoms, and both turned the simple act of buying contraceptives into elaborate comedic obstacles courses filled with mishaps and misunderstandings. What made this situation even more bizarre was that neither production team knew the other movie existed during the development process. Booty Call featured an all-black cast led by Jamie Foxx and Tommy Davidson, while Trojan War starred an all-white cast including Will Friedle and Jennifer Love Hewitt. The two films were being developed simultaneously at different studios, with completely separate writers, directors, and producers, yet somehow both creative teams arrived at nearly identical concepts for their comedies. Takashi Bufford, the writer of Booty Call, later confirmed that his screenplay was written entirely without any knowledge that Trojan War was in development. When asked about the strange coincidence, Bufford explained the phenomenon by saying that sometimes similar ideas just bubble up from the cultural atmosphere at the same time. Booty Call reached theaters first in February, while Trojan War followed later in the year, though it was released in only 2 theaters, and quickly disappeared from cinemas after earning just $309 in total ticket sales. Fact 5. The original director dropped out last minute. Booty Call almost had a completely different person behind the camera, as the movie was originally supposed to be directed by Takashi Bufford himself, the same man who had written the screenplay with his trusty calculator by his side. Bufford had planned to make his directorial debut with his own script, which would have given him complete creative control over both the writing and the visual storytelling of the film, but circumstances forced him to abandon those plans at the worst possible moment. The production was already moving forward with Bufford set to direct, when he suddenly had to step away from the project due to personal reasons that were never publicly detailed. This unexpected departure created a serious problem for the studio, since they had already committed to making the movie, cast the main actors, and set up the production schedule, but now they found themselves without anyone to actually direct the film. With time running short and the production clock ticking, the studio scrambled to find a replacement director who could step in and take over the project immediately. They turned to Jeff Pollack, who had previously directed Above the Rim, a basketball drama starring Tupac Shakur that had been released a few years earlier. Pollack was brought in at what industry sources described as the very last minute, meaning he had to quickly familiarize himself with Bufford's script, meet with the cast, and essentially restart the pre-production process with very little time to prepare. This last-minute change in directors had significant consequences for the final film, as Pollack ended up heavily rewriting Bufford's original script along with actor Tommy Davidson. What audiences eventually saw in theaters was quite different from what Bufford had originally envisioned when he first started writing with his calculator, since the new director brought his own creative vision and comedic sensibilities to the project that had originally been designed as someone else's directorial debut. Fact 6. Bill Cosby publicly hated the movie. Bill Cosby made no secret of his disgust with Booty Call, reportedly calling the film exactly that, disgusting, and publicly expressing his complete hatred for the movie whenever the subject came up in interviews or public appearances. This harsh criticism from one of America's most famous comedians created an awkward situation, especially considering that the film actually featured Jamie Foxx doing impressions of Cosby himself as part of the comedy. Cosby's reaction to the movie wasn't entirely surprising, given his well-known stance on what he considered appropriate entertainment for African-American audiences. Throughout his career, Cosby had been vocal about his belief that black entertainers should create content that presented positive images and avoided what he saw as harmful stereotypes or overly crude humor. From his perspective, Booty Call represented exactly the kind of comedy he felt was damaging to the community, with its focus on sexual situations, profanity, and what he viewed as lowbrow humor. The irony of Cosby's criticism became even more pronounced when viewers realized that Jamie Foxx's character actually performed Bill Cosby impressions during intimate moments in the film. In one particularly memorable scene, Foxx's character Buns does Cosby-style comedy routines during romantic encounters, mimicking the famous comedian's distinctive speaking style and wholesome persona. The movie essentially paid tribute to Cosby's comedic legacy, while simultaneously creating exactly the kind of content that Cosby publicly condemned. This situation highlighted a broader cultural debate that was happening in the 1990s about representation in black comedy and entertainment. While some audiences and critics appreciated Booty Call for its unapologetic humor and successful box office performance, others, like Cosby, felt that such films perpetuated negative stereotypes and failed to elevate the community. The fact that the movie both honored Cosby through imitation and offended him through its content. Fact 7. A future Stargate star, had a tiny role. Long before Amanda Tapping became a household name among science fiction fans as Major Samantha Carter in Stargate SG-1, she was just another struggling actress taking small roles wherever she could find them, including a brief appearance as Dr. Moore in the hospital scenes of Booty Call. This tiny role represented one of her earliest film credits during a period when she was still building her career, and had no idea that she would eventually become one of the most recognizable faces in science fiction television. At the time Booty Call was filming in 1996 and 1997, Tapping was a relatively unknown Canadian actress who had been taking whatever work she could get in both television and film. Her resume included small parts in shows like The X-Files and Forever Knight, as well as minor roles in various made-for-television movies, but nothing that had given her significant recognition or established her as a star. The role of Dr. Moore in Booty Call was exactly the kind of small supporting part that working actors often take to pay the bills while hoping for their big break. The hospital scenes where Tapping appeared were filmed in Toronto, which made sense since she was a Canadian actress working in the Canadian film industry at the time. Her character Dr. Moore would have been involved in the chaotic hospital sequence where Jamie Foxx's character impersonates a doctor to help his injured friend, though her specific scenes and dialogue were minimal compared to the main cast members. Just 1 year after Booty Call was released, Tapping would land the role that would define her career when she was cast as Samantha Carter in Stargate SG-1 in 1997. The character of Carter, a brilliant astrophysicist and military officer, would run for 10 seasons and over 200 episodes, making Tapping one of the longest-running female leads in science fiction television history, and transforming her from an actress taking small roles in comedies to a genre icon. Fact 8. The Jack Russell Terrier nearly stole the show. Among all the human actors trying to get laughs in Booty Call, it was a small Jack Russell Terrier named Killer who managed to capture the attention of one of America's most respected film critics. Roger Ebert, writing his review for the Chicago Sun-Times, specifically singled out the scenes involving Nicky's mischievous pet dog as very, very funny, suggesting that this four-legged performer was delivering some of the movie's best comedic moments without even trying to be funny. Killer the dog played a crucial role in the film's plot, serving as more than just a cute pet decoration in the background of scenes. The terrier actually drives much of the movie's action by snatching and destroying the main character's condom at a critical moment, forcing the two male protagonists to embark on their wild late-night adventure to find protection. But beyond this plot function, the dog also provided unexpected comedy through what appeared to be genuine, unscripted reactions to the chaos happening around him. Ebert noted in his review that some of the dog's funniest moments seem to happen naturally, particularly a scene where the terrier continues leaping desperately into the air, barking and snapping at a condom being held just out of reach. The critic described this behavior as possibly unscripted, suggesting that the dog's authentic reactions to the situation were funnier than anything the human actors were doing in the same scene. The terrier also figured prominently in what Ebert called the funniest single scene in the movie, involving the dog licking someone's toes under a restaurant table, leading to a case of mistaken identity. According to animal training records from the production, the filmmakers used a clear plastic tube with a condom attached to create the tug-of-war scenes, allowing the dog to play naturally while the cameras captured genuine canine behavior that translated into comedy gold on screen. Fact 9. The script was heavily rewritten during production. What audiences saw in theaters as booty call was significantly different from what screenwriter Takashi Bufford originally wrote with his calculator by his side, because the script underwent major changes while the cameras were rolling. Director Jeff Pollack and actor Tommy Davidson took it upon themselves to heavily rewrite Bufford's original screenplay during the actual production process, essentially creating a new version of the movie while they were in the middle of making it. This kind of extensive rewriting during production is relatively unusual in Hollywood, where scripts typically go through multiple drafts and revisions long before filming begins. Most movies have their storylines, dialogue, and character development locked down well in advance, allowing actors to prepare their performances and directors to plan their shots accordingly. However, Booty Call became one of those rare projects where the creative team decided that the original script needed fundamental changes even after production had already started. The decision to rewrite during filming suggests that Pollack and Davidson felt the original material wasn't working as intended, either because certain jokes weren't landing during rehearsals, specific scenes weren't translating well to the screen, or the overall tone needed adjustment to better fit the cast's comedic strengths. Tommy Davidson's involvement in the rewriting process was particularly significant, since he was not only one of the lead actors, but also had experience in comedy writing from his work on television shows. This collaborative rewriting approach meant that much of what made it into the final film was created through improvisation and on-set creativity, rather than careful pre-planning. The process likely contributed to the movie's loose, spontaneous feel, where many of the funniest moments seemed to emerge naturally from the actors' interactions rather than from carefully crafted scripted dialogue. However, it also meant that Bufford's original vision for the project was substantially altered from what he had initially conceived. Fact 10. Hospital scenes were filmed in different countries. The chaotic hospital sequence that serves as Booty Call's climax was actually filmed hundreds of miles away from where the rest of the movie took place, as the production team crossed international borders to shoot these scenes in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. While the majority of the film was shot in genuine New York City locations, including the authentic streets of Manhattan's Chinatown, the hospital where Jamie Foxx impersonates a doctor and delivers a baby was located in an entirely different country. This cross-border filming arrangement was a common practice during the 1990s, when many American film productions discovered they could save significant amounts of money by shooting certain scenes in Canada. The Canadian government offered attractive tax incentives and rebates to foreign film productions, while Canadian hospitals, hotels, and other facilities often charged lower rates than their American counterparts. For a budget-conscious production like Booty Call, these savings could make the difference between being able to afford elaborate scenes or having to cut them entirely. The hospital scenes were particularly important to the movie's plot and required multiple interior locations, medical equipment, and numerous extra actors playing doctors, nurses, and patients. Filming these sequences in a real Toronto hospital facility allowed the production to access authentic medical settings without the extremely high costs that would have been associated with renting similar spaces in New York City. The scenes included complex sequences where the main characters sneak through hospital corridors. Jamie Foxx's character performs medical procedures while pretending to be a doctor, and the group faces the threat of being discovered by real medical staff. The international filming split meant that actors like Tommy Davidson and Jamie Foxx had to travel between New York and Toronto during production, creating a unique situation where the movie's climactic scenes were shot in a completely different country from where the story was supposed to be taking place. Fact 11. It tripled its budget at box office. Fact 11. It tripled its budget at box office. Despite receiving mixed reviews from critics and being dismissed by some as lowbrow comedy, Booty Call proved that audiences were hungry for the kind of raunchy humor it delivered. turning a modest $7 million production budget into over $20 million in box office earnings. This impressive financial performance meant that the film nearly tripled its production costs, transforming what could have been a risky investment into a clear commercial success for Columbia Pictures and everyone involved in the project. The movie's strong box office showing was particularly noteworthy given that it faced skepticism from critics who questioned its crude humor and seemingly simple premise. Many professional reviewers gave the film lukewarm or negative ratings, with some suggesting that its focus on sexual comedy and bathroom humor wouldn't appeal to mainstream audiences. However, these critical assessments failed to predict how moviegoers would actually respond when they had the chance to see the film in theaters. The financial success of Booty Call demonstrated the power of word, of mouth marketing, and the appeal of comedies that weren't afraid to push boundaries. Audiences seemed to appreciate the film's unapologetic approach to adult humor, and many viewers found the performances by Jamie Foxx and Tommy Davidson genuinely entertaining despite the critical reservations. The movie's success also helped establish Jamie Foxx as a bankable movie star, proving that his television popularity could translate into film success. This kind of budget-to-earnings ratio was exactly what Takashi Bufford had hoped for when he wrote the script with his calculator nearby, carefully controlling costs to maximize the potential for profit. The film's financial performance validated his approach of creating entertainment that could be produced economically while still delivering the kind of comedy that audiences wanted to pay to see, regardless of what professional critics thought about its artistic merits. Fact 12. Charles S. Dutton publicly criticized audiences. Actor Charles S. Dutton, known for his powerful dramatic performances in films like Rudy and the television series Rock, made a very public statement about movie-going choices when he appeared on The Charlie Rose Show in 1997 to criticize young African Americans for their entertainment preferences. Dutton specifically called out audiences who were choosing to buy tickets for Booty Call instead of supporting Rosewood, a serious historical drama about racial violence that was playing in theaters at the same time. Rosewood was a John Singleton-directed film that told the tragic true story of a black community in Florida that was destroyed by white mobs in 1923. The movie featured an ensemble cast including Jon Voight, Ving Rhames, and Don Cheadle, and was intended to educate audiences about a largely forgotten chapter of American racial history. However, despite critical praise and its important subject matter, Rosewood was struggling to find an audience while the much more lighthearted Booty Call was drawing crowds to movie theaters across the country. Dutton's appearance on the respected PBS talk show represented his frustration with what he saw as a missed opportunity for the African American community to support meaningful cinema that addressed serious historical issues. From his perspective, audiences were choosing easy entertainment over important stories that could educate people about their heritage and the struggles of previous generations. His criticism highlighted a broader cultural debate about the responsibility of both filmmakers and audiences to support movies that uplift and educate rather than simply entertain. The box office numbers seemed to support Dutton's concerns, as Booty Call earned over $20 million, while Rosewood managed only about $13 million despite its longer running time, bigger budget, and more prestigious director. This disparity in audience support became a talking point about cultural priorities and the types of stories that resonated with different segments of the movie-going public. Fact 13. The Simpsons later referenced it. 2 years after Booty Call had its theatrical run, the long-running animated series The Simpsons gave the raunchy comedy an unexpected moment of recognition in a 1999 episode that featured Hollywood executives discussing movies. The episode, titled Beyond Blunderdome, included a brief but memorable reference where a film industry character enthusiastically praises what he calls the director's cut of Booty Call, describing it as absolutely fabulous to his colleagues in a typical example of the show's satirical take on entertainment industry culture. The reference appeared during a scene where fictional movie executives are having a conversation about films, and one character named Milo tells another character named Hannah that she simply has to see this special version of Booty Call. When Hannah responds by asking if it's even better than the original version, which she also thought was pretty fabulous, the exchange becomes a perfect example of The Simpsons writers poking fun at the way Hollywood insiders often treat even the most lowbrow entertainment as sophisticated art when it suits their purposes. This kind of pop culture reference was typical of The Simpsons during its golden years, when the show's writers regularly included jokes that referenced both high and low culture, often treating crude comedies with the same reverence that pretentious film executives might give to serious dramas. The joke worked on multiple levels, both as a commentary on Hollywood's tendency to create unnecessary director's cuts of popular films and as a way of acknowledging that booty call had become enough of a cultural touchstone to be worth referencing on television. The Beyond Blunderdome episode was part of The Simpsons' 11th season and featured Mel Gibson as a guest star, making the Hollywood satire even more pointed since it involved real entertainment industry figures alongside the fictional characters discussing movies that audiences would recognize from their own movie-going experiences. Fact 14. Jamie Foxx's stunt double lost his wig. One of the most embarrassing moments caught on camera in Booty Call happened during what should have been a straightforward physical comedy sequence, when Jamie Foxx's stunt double accidentally lost his hairpiece while performing a fall, creating an unintentional blooper that somehow made it into the final cut of the film. The scene occurs during the chaotic dog chase sequence, where Fox's character Buns and Tommy Davidson's character Russian are desperately trying to catch Killer, the mischievous Jack Russell Terrier who has escaped with a condom in his mouth. The mishap happens when both characters are running down a city street in hot pursuit of the dog, and a car door suddenly opens in their path, causing both men to collide with it and flip over onto the ground in a slapstick moment that was clearly designed to get laughs from audiences. However, what the filmmakers probably didn't intend was for viewers to get a clear look at the stunt performer who was doubling for Jamie Foxx during this physically demanding sequence. As both characters fall to the ground in slow motion, sharp-eyed viewers can clearly see that the person playing Fox's character is obviously not Foxx himself, and during the tumbling action, the stunt double's wig comes completely loose from his head, revealing the deception in a way that breaks the illusion of the scene. The fact that this obvious mistake made it through the editing process and into theaters suggests either that the filmmakers didn't notice the error during post-production, or that they decided the physical comedy of the fall was funny enough to outweigh the technical embarrassment of showing the stunt double so clearly. This kind of visible movie mistake has become a favorite among fans who enjoy spotting continuity errors and production bloopers, turning an accidental moment of carelessness into an enduring piece of movie trivia that gives viewers something extra to look for during repeat viewings. Fact 15. Bernie Mac played a hypocritical judge. Before Bernie Mac became a household name with The Bernie Mac Show and his starring role in the Ocean's 11 trilogy, he made a memorable supporting appearance in Booty Call as Judge Peabody, a character whose personal behavior was completely at odds with the moral authority his position was supposed to represent. Mac's character was specifically described in production notes as a hypocritical judge who maintained a secret romantic relationship with his female court clerk, creating exactly the kind of comedic contradiction that the film's writers love to explore. Judge Peabody appears during one of the movie's many wild encounters that Jamie Foxx and Tommy Davidson's characters experienced during their late-night quest for contraceptives, and Mac's performance brought his distinctive comedic energy to a role that was designed to highlight the absurd double standards that exist in society. The character's hypocrisy was central to the joke, as audiences were meant to laugh at the contrast between his official judicial dignity and his secret personal indiscretions with his court employee. This role came at a time when Bernie Mac was still building his career as a film actor, having already established himself as one of the original kings of comedy alongside Steve Harvey, D.L. Hewley, and Cedric the Entertainer. His appearance in Booty Call demonstrated his ability to bring his stand-up comedy timing and larger-than-life personality to supporting film roles, even when those roles were relatively small compared to the main characters. The casting of Bernie Mac as Judge Peabody was particularly effective because his natural comedic persona was perfect for playing authority figures who aren't quite as authoritative as they pretend to be. Mac's ability to convey both pompous self-importance and underlying ridiculousness made him an ideal choice for a character whose entire purpose was to represent the kind of moral hypocrisy that the film's irreverent humor was constantly targeting throughout its 79-minute runtime.